Sure.
Okay.
Nope.
All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we are joined by Michael Carter Jr., an 11th generation farmer in the United States and a 5th generation farmer on Carter Farms. His family Century Farm in Orange County, Virginia, where he gives workshops on how to grow and market ethnic vegetables. Michael received an agricultural economics degree from North Carolina A&T University and worked in Ghana, Kenya, and Israel as an agronomist and organic agricultural consultant. He presently consults with numerous governments, organizations, individuals throughout the region and nation on food access, food security and insecurity, as well as market research, social and economic evaluation programs, as well as racial understanding, immersion, history, and cultural training, among other areas. He also teaches and expounds on the contributions of Africans and African Americans to agriculture worldwide and trains students, educators, and I'm sorry, did I say that again? No, I did not. And African cultural understanding, empathy, and implicit bias recognition. And today he will be discussing his work with Africulture. This webinar will be recorded and made available tomorrow on our website and YouTube channel. At the end of this presentation, we will have a short Q&A portion. Please post any questions you have to the comment section of this video, and please remember to post respectfully. Now I'll hand it over to Michael.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today and share a little bit about Africulture. If you just give me 1 minute as I share my screen and my presentation with you all. I'm gonna need that whole minute too, not 49 seconds. I need the whole minute. So just give me 1 moment and we'll get that out and we'll get started. I trust everybody's had a good day and gotten settled in from work or maybe you're at home like I've been at home all day. Just be about another 45 seconds, so we'll be good to go and ready to go. Share my screen. Please don't make fun of my tabs. I do have a lot of tabs open. Very good. Good afternoon, and again, welcome to our presentation on Africulture. And I'll explain a little bit about what Africulture is and is not. But again, I'm Michael Carter Jr. from Carter Farms, from Africulture, our nonprofit, from Carter Brothers. And I'm a century farmer, meaning that my family has owned a farm in the state of Virginia for the last over 100 years. My family has been farming and working in agriculture in America since at the latest 1745 and at the earliest 1622 or potentially beyond, before then as well. So we'll go through a lot of that as I talk through it. We also do Hinasim. Hinasim is the Ghanaian or Tree language word for our story. So I find Africulture and Hinasim kind of tells the story of agriculture, tells the story of our relationship to agriculture, in addition to historical world local events that many of us are very familiar with and how it affected this small family farm. My son jumping on a hay bale at the farm. Hard to keep a young man down. And before I begin, I always like to give an ode to my elders, to those many shoulders that we stand upon. So I'm going to take a moment of silence just to acknowledge those spirits that have passed on before us and those spirits that are still here in this present realm today that we continue to stand on, and giving them honor and respect. I do a lot of my work because of them, and I am able to do a lot of my work because of them. So I'm going to take just a moment of silence just to honor them and their spirits, the efforts of all those individuals, known and unknown, who supported our work, our efforts, and continue to contribute to all of our lives. And I like to show this picture here. This is a picture of my great-grandmother. In this picture as well is my uncle, my father, numerous cousins, great uncles, etc. I'm gonna rub my cursor over my father's head. This long-haired gentleman right here is my father. I currently probably received his head. We had the same shaped head, same shaped head when we were younger. And it's a pleasure to kind of be able to see pictures like this and tell this story. This picture was taken, I think, in 1964. My father was probably even a little sooner than that, 1960, most likely, 60, 61. And it's a great pleasure to kind of be able to tell their story and their legacy and lift them up in a very meaningful manner. And you may be asking yourself, what is agriculture? Africulture. Africulture is the principles, practices, plants, and people of African descent that have contributed to agriculture locally, regionally, and globally. One of the things that we'll be doing this season at Africulture is focusing on eating for your ethnic type. Many of us have read the book or heard the term eating for your blood type, eating for if you're AB positive or whatever blood types you may be carrying, O positive, et cetera. And I really think there's a connection between our foods, the land, and the types that the land they came from, as well as the varieties and types that we eat, has a direct effect upon our genetic health. And I really want to be able to, we'll be able to explore this a lot more this season at our farm, doing numerous events called Taste of Africa. We'll be growing roughly about 60 different vegetables, grains, and other African plants at our farm this coming spring, probably between 60 to 80 different varieties of various plants, and hopefully putting them into our diets and seeing just the results. This is an unscientific study, but I have a strong feeling that we're going to see an improvement in our overall health, vigor, and vitality, as well as longevity. We continue to eat in this manner. Eating foods from your cultural and genetic origins and source that should be able to promote and encourage your cultural, ethnic, and national health. And I really, I can't implore this enough, that it's a lot of foods that we eat that are not as healthy for us, and there's plenty of foods that we grew up on, that our grandparents and great-grandparents grew up on, that sustained them, and many of them were African-based foods. And some of those foods we'll be talking about today. We'll also be going into a little bit about our, history, a little bit about science, a lot about agriculture. Please take notes if you can, write down anything. I don't mind answering questions at the end. You're going to get a lot of information in a very compact period of time. So if I'm speaking fast, only because I know I probably have 35 more slides to go, and I probably have like 5 minutes left on the presentation. So bear with me, but please enjoy the presentation about Africulture. And we're going to take you through history, through time, and through an agricultural field. Many of us, when people come to my farm, they generally take the Africulture tour, what I call walking a mile in my shoes. We walk about a mile on the farm, and in that process of walking a mile, which takes about an hour, we go through various aspects of history, observing plants, weeds, trees, and talking about the impact upon the Africans and agriculture. So this is a very modified tour. We look forward, if you like what you hear now, please come out to Carter Farms later on in the spring and summer to just take the tour. And we're going to start this story roughly in Orange County. This picture here is of my great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, Courtney Ellis. To the right of us, this is a slave inhabitants census log in the county of Orange, Virginia, on the 22nd of June, 1860. And there at the bottom, this little area right here, you probably can't see it that well, but that's R.O.B.T. Ellis. With many of us African Americans, as we look for our genealogy and our history, it's tough to trace and know exactly what a lot of these things mean. We don't have a lot of, many of us don't have a lot of history, especially if our ancestors were enslaved at various individuals' homes, because there was not a lot of documentation written there. And even take a couple steps back, my family comes from the first plantation or at least a portion of my family, was enslaved on the first plantation in America called Shirley Plantation, which is in Charles City County, Virginia. And we still maintain a very good, a good relationship with that family there. And ironically enough, that family is the Carter family. King Carter, Robert Carter, and some of the other individuals there were notorious and infamous, and probably some of the largest enslaved African owners in America at any given time. And so we have some lineage coming out of that area in that particular plantation. And then we have a very strong lineage tied to Mount Pelier and Orange County proper. Robert Ellis, I don't know much about him. I'm not sure on this particular thing if Robert Ellis is the plantation owner, or if that's my great uncle to the sixth power. Because Miss Courtney Ellis is the granddaughter of Robert Ellis. Her father, James Ellis, fought in the United States colored troops in the Civil War. Miss Courtney would not be listed right here because she was born in 1861, a year before this census was taken. But Mr. Robert Ellis, her grandfather, he started a little community in Orange County in a place called Lahore, and it's called Freetown. And his community was about 18 acres of land in which 6 to 8 African-American families lived there and resided there, starting in 1860, a little bit after this register was taken. And we're going to talk about a little about Freetown and that history as well. Miss Courtney Ellis is was on my grandmother's side, and it's my grandmother's great-grandmother. And many of us, because we're in the Piedmont area of the state of Virginia, we're very much familiar with cattle. And very few of us really associate cattle with the African auroch. I'm sure none of us do. But the origins of the modern day cow comes from the north central and northeastern side of Africa. And it's based upon this wild animal called the auroch. And many of the Africans now, the taurine cattle or the African Bos cattle, were domesticated over time and has given us the varieties and the species of cattle that we have today. So these ancient herons of northeast African, domesticated African Bos cattle over 11,000 years ago. So we have a long history of working with cattle in whatever capacity that we felt was right for our culture. In many communities now, as well as in ancient times, cattle was very much sacred, and not as much used for food. Today, definitely in the United States and definitely in the Piedmont region of Virginia, cattle is mainly used for consumption of meat. But again, this is part of the African origin of cattle and some of the livestock that has influenced the creation of the agriculture industry in America, and ultimately its growth and success. And this gentleman here doesn't have a connection to Virginia, but he does have a connection to one of my favorite foods, or food, liquid spices, and that's vanilla. Mr. Edmond Albius. Mr. Edmond Albius was born enslaved in a place called Reunion Island in a little community called St. Suzanne in 1829. And he, at the age of 12, created a pollinating technique in which he pollinated the vanilla orchid and was able to then produce and procure vanilla beans. The same hand pollination technique is still used to this very day. And the same area in which he started at Reunion, which is right next to Madagascar, is considered the Mecca, or the greatest region for the production of vanilla in the world. For many of us who are cooks and enjoy good culinary spices and things like that, we usually look for Madagascar vanilla. And we have to thank Mr. Edmond Albius for its creation, and probably for its high price too. But Mr. Edmond Albius, despite his circumstances as being an enslaved child, he did a wonderful job of understanding and working with plants. And the enslaved Africans throughout the world, but specifically in America, found a specific resonance with nature and with plants, where they were, despite their enslaved conditions, they were still able to do and create some major lasting inventions, practices, principles that we still use today in our agricultural industry. This plant here is another African plant called amaranth. Many of us know amaranth from there's a whole bunch of different names for amaranth here in the United States. The amaranth here is, grown, very little amaranth are grown actually for cultivation or edible purposes here in the United States, especially here in Virginia. But we have things like pigweed, poke salad. We have different variations of this plant that many of us see as weed. If you ask a farmer about amaranth, they're gonna probably curl their nose up at you and want to spray it with something, because amaranth has been a pest for many farmers for a long time, because it has the ability to pretty much grow anywhere. It sets seeds very early, and it sets a whole lot of seeds, and it's drought resistant, it's flood resistant, it's really glyphosate, Roundup resistant in many cases. And this, to me, models kind of the African in America, this particular plant. I call generally this plant, or I call individuals, make a statement, refer to individuals as GMAs, genetically modified Africans. This plant is very much in line with that, or we're very much in line with this plant in terms of many African plants that came here had to adapt to this environment. Would it be, the harshness of winter, just being in a different place, understanding the rain cycles, the winter cycles, the insect patterns, the abuse, the being labeled as a weed or unwanted vessel or species in a community, in a field, etc. And this is a synonym or a metaphor for the African American experience. But it also is a metaphor for the tremendous amount of reserve and resistance to exist despite not necessarily being wanted or desired in a certain place. This is one of the plants that really does a marvelous job of showing, how tough and resilient we can and are in its truest form. If you ever have spent any time in the islands, in the Caribbean, you'll know the term callaloo. Callaloo is a dish, and amaranth is the main source of greens for the callaloo. It's a delicacy in the Caribbean. It's extremely healthy green that I think all of us should incorporate in our diet at some point in our lives, and keep it in our diet. It can be eaten raw, it can be eaten cooked, and it generally can be found at various African stores that we sell to in the region. Charlottesville, in Fredericksburg, and we'll probably have some in Richmond and probably in the DC area as well. So this is a great vegetable. I love eating it. I love growing it because it doesn't take anything to grow it. But it's also like I said, a metaphor for the African American reality in America. And this is one of our Afromercials. And this young lady here is a great heroine of the community. Her name is Madam or Nanny Helen Barrows. Nanny Helen Barrows is from the Thornhill side of Orange County, Virginia. And she's a cousin of our family. Her father was a pastor at our family church, which my uncle was a pastor of for some time. So it's part of our family legacy. And Ms. Barrows is a tremendous educator for women in Washington, D.C., and did some marvelous things in Washington, D.C. to the point that she had a street and school named after her. So if you're ever going down 295 in Washington, D.C., as this picture indicates, you'll see Burroughs Avenue, Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue. And this is one of those great monumental figures that came from this area. And there's a lot of young ladies especially who came from this area and did phenomenal things to shape and mold the world. And she had three consistent principles that she wanted every woman that she knew and taught to live by. That's the Bible, the broom, and the bath. Keep your soul clean, your body clean, and your environment clean. She's a great woman that needs to continue to be lifted up and venerated beyond just February, but throughout the year. She did a lot for women. She did a lot for women empowerment, upliftment, self-esteem improvement. And ultimately, this was a great example of how to carry yourself despite the challenges that she faced. And of course, moving through time, after you're going for a while, this particular nut it changed the course of the world. And this particular nut is spelled K-O-L-A, and it's pronounced the cola nut. Yeah, the cola nut. But if it was spelled C-O-L-A, many people will make the correlation between what I'm saying probably, because this nut is a highly caffeinated nut that's coming out of West Africa. It's a delicacy in Nigeria. It's grown in the northern regions of Ghana and Burkina Faso, then of Cameroon, and in Benin, in the highlands of Benin. And the cola nut was a highly caffeinated nut that came from the cola tree. This is the same cola nut or cola that we refer to in our Coca-Cola, our Pepsi-Cola, RC colas, all the colas that we drink, that we have known and drink now. I say drink, I don't really drink a lot of colas, but when I was a child, I did drink a lot of Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, and RC colas. And without this nut, there would not be any cola. It's been Coca. There would have been no cola. And this particular nut, again, very few people give the African origins of cola to this nut. But without it, again, the soft drinks that we know of today with this high caffeine would not be in existence. And this is another mild contribution to to American culture, American way of life, and also the world economy. I'm sure many of us have been to the Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, and there are tremendous facts that's given about the number of bottles being produced, how many people drink it, how many gallons are being drunk every second or every minute of the day. So it's a great attribution to this particular nut. In the formula today, they don't use this nut anymore. They use a lot of other chemical formulations and to create Coca-Cola, a lot of acids and other things to create the taste. But this is one of the first ingredients that was used in the creation of the Coca-Cola, with the coca plant, the cola nut, and various spices. And as we move along through history, 1910, our nation had more than 893,000 Black farmers. And Black farmers and farm workers represented about 60% of farm laborers. 1900, the state of Virginia alone had 25,000 Black farmers. I had the most Black farmers in the United States at that time. And that was at the turn of the century, between 1899 to 1900, the farm census, or the census. In 1910 as well, my great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother opted to become full-fledged farmers on their own. And they purchased a property in Orange County, Virginia, off of Tatum Road, and this is the original deed right here, on November 5th, 1910. And going forward, they made it a point to make sure that they had land. So they purchased 150 acres of land in Orange County, November 5th, 1910, for approximately $722.05. During that time as well was a great hardship for a lot of African Americans because they were sharecroppers. They could not generally work for themselves without fear of being arrested for breaking various black coat laws. And you had to do a lot of saving and a lot of hiding. I'm thankful for the community of Orange for being open to my family, for being able to purchase the property. We've had various intercessors from the community and the county government that came in and assisted my family in making sure that the property stayed in the family. Moving through history, you see 1925, Black farmers in the state of Virginia reached their peak with approximately 50,147 operators. I'm not sure if they were all Black. The way the census reads, it says it's non-white. I assume that a great majority of those, however, were Black farmers. And as we're going through history, this is one of the most important crops as well. There's another African crop called jute, or palava, or malakia, or Jew's mallow. This particular jute is grown at our farm. We grow it not as much for food, even though people come by and pick some for themselves. I'm not a huge fan of it. This particular plant has the slimy-like nature, very much similar to okra, and it's used as a thickener in stews. Malakia stew is very common in Northeast Africa and in Middle Eastern countries. Arab populations love it. And that slimy-like nature has a tremendous amount of nutrition in terms of lowering blood sugar, providing a very amenable amount of nutrients, especially to the African genome. It's incredible the amount of nutrition that a lot of these plants provide, and it's usually a lot of micronutrients that fit, again, the genome of most African Americans. And you find that this particular plant, as well as okra, various studies say that it helps to lower high blood pressure and really combat diabetes by reducing or changing the way sugar is absorbed in the bloodstream. So it's not standing there stagnant, causing a higher glucose level. It actually helps to metabolize the sugar in the body a lot differently. And this is a great staple in Monticello in Thomas Jefferson's plantation. Jute was grown because it was before there was cotton, jute was the fabric of the lives of America. Jute was used to make ropes, sacks, and was a very critical aspect of the earlier colonial period, pre-colonial on up to around the Civil War. Cotton, I'm not sure we would talk about cotton much in this particular presentation, but cotton is another African crop that, again, was a tremendous crop for the advancement of agriculture. And another crop that comes from West Africa, and it thrived well here. I mean, almost too much. Cotton is the reason, in my estimation, why slavery persisted for as long as it did. That if cotton and the cotton gin had not have been created, it was a possibility that the enslavement period would have been ended maybe 20 or 30 years sooner, around the time that, ideally around the time most likely that England ended their cotton, their enslavement in the 1808, 1810, 1815 era time period. And this is the okra plant from my farm. And most of us know okra. We're familiar with okra. But if you ever, people know okra now, if you ever were in Senegal, Senegambia area, Gambia, maybe 20 years ago, and you asked for okra, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. In that particular area, it's called gumbo. The okra plant is actually called gumbo. And this is where we get the idea, or just the name for okra stew in New Orleans, in South, that would be Southeast, in the Mississippi Delta, where you have gumbo. What those individuals were making was okra stew, or okra, depending on what part of Africa you're in. And this is another crop that was brought here. And many of the time with okra especially, those seeds were smuggled through the hair of the enslaved Africans who were brought here. Not knowing where they were going many times, the individuals who would fix up their hair and kind of prep them for the journey, which is not a really deep prepping, and many times maybe they didn't speak the same language, but it would braid in their hair seeds. And okra is one of those seeds that braid in your hair so that, when you got there, you could plant it, because they didn't know where they were going and what would be happening and would they have food when they got there. Okra is a tremendous crop, highly nutritious. Again, my Western palate at this point is not much of a fan of it, but I do consume it, and it does have tremendous health benefits for all people, but specifically for African Americans who have issues maybe with high blood pressure or diabetes. Okra has kind of taken on a life of its own. It's a tremendous grower. You can't, if you have a field of okra, you have a lot of okra, because okra grows a lot of pods. Very easy to grow, not a lot of insects bother it. And okra also can be extremely difficult to harvest at times because the leaves have a little stickiness to it, so they kind of trick you as you're going through. Very unique crop, but highly healthy, extremely healthy. And one of those crops, again, that we need to start adding to our diet because it fits, again, our genetic genome and really helps to assist in regulating blood sugar a little differently than other foods. Probably my second favorite crop on our farm. This is called Lego spinach or Nigerian spinach. This is in the Celosia family. If you know anything about gardening or landscaping, these little flowers here on this plume in this picture here, it's called Celosius. And right now, they're presently used as a ornamental plants for landscaping and things. It has a nice flower, and the way those particular ones are, they usually produce flowers very early. I don't recommend eating those, but the ones we recommend, we get our seeds directly from West Africa, usually Nigeria and Ghana. And it grows into these tall, beautiful, insect-resistant plants that actually taste very good. These greens are very much not something you have to really adjust your taste buds to. You would cook this, prepare this just like you would spinach, collard greens, Swiss chard, kales, etc. You can also do it raw, like with lettuce, to add to your salads. This particular plant as well grows somewhere between 7 to 8 feet tall. Doesn't need a lot of water. It's drought resistant, flood resistant to a point, and insect resistant. You can see on here, it's only a few insects that really bother it. For me, the only one that bothers it is called the Colorado potato beetle, which is my arch nemesis of the farm. But these plants do extremely well, grow well, they taste well. And I'm curious, this year we'll be sending several of these plants off for research to get nutritional analysis on them to see what type of micronutrients and major nutrients they have in them and how they can benefit our diet and our health. This is my favorite plant by far. This is called Incutumary. Many of us may know this as elephant ear. You'll find this, I'm not sure if this is native to Africa, but it's definitely one of the main crops within Africa, especially West Africa, the main vegetable, or leafy vegetable anyway. Incutumary, and I do not recommend you eating any of the plants that you may have at your home or that you may see that has colored variated leaves, white, pinks, purples, because usually those are hybrids, and they're hybridized for their colors, maybe not necessarily for their edibility, or I'm not sure if edibility is the word, but being edible. So we sell from some of the tubers, we buy a lot of these from our Asian markets and then plant them and eat from those, because we know that those particular ones are designed to be eaten. In various cultures, they're known as cocoyam, as taro. In Hawaii, they're known as poi. And poi is one of the national foods of Hawaii. And many of the cultures eat the root or the tuber. At Carter Farms, we grow it strictly for the leaves. It's one of the, highly nutritious. Again, this particular leaf or vegetable, you cannot eat it raw. If you do try to eat it raw, don't blame me. It'll irritate your throat and whatever else it touches with the white liquid that comes out of it. It's very nutritious, but you have to, in Ghana, they say you have to cook it well. So you have to pretty much cook the life out of it, or at least cook it for about 20 minutes, saute it, grill it, boil it. And then different things that ancestors would do in terms of boiling things. You would hear people saying we need to boil it, pour the water off, and then cook it. And that would be one of the things you would do with it if you didn't know what to do with it, or how to cook it. This has oxalic acid in it, which I stated earlier, the white liquid that's inside of it. This white liquid is a skin irritant, and it serves, for me anyway, as a good protector against deer, because the oxalic acid does not just work against humans, it works against all animals who touch the white part with their tongue, with their lips, their teeth, etc., and will cause irritation, not to the point of death, but definitely to the point of discomfort, where you're trying to scratch whatever it is that is touched. And I'm not sure about you, but I know anytime you have an itch in your throat or something, you can't go take your hand and go back there and scratch it. So like deer, they cannot take their hoof and go in their mouth and scratch their throat. So that irritation makes them go somewhere else and have to deal with that issue. And that can leave your hostas and other plants in your farm protected, because they have to go deal with the irritation and the itch. And this particular, and the young lady here is another family member of ours. She's a daughter of Freetown, a great-granddaughter of Robert Ellis, the gentleman I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. Her name is Edna Lewis. Edna Lewis is a phenomenal woman, again, from Freetown here in Orange County, Virginia, and she is known as the Grand Dame of Southern cooking. If she lived today, she would have her own cooking show and probably be just as or more famous than Gordon Ramsay, and have about 14 different shows on the Food Network, on Fox, and all the other HGTV probably as well. She was a very talented woman who ended up migrating from Orange County and heading to New York, which became a dry cleaner and ironer, kind of, maintaining ironing clothes, and then took a job in a restaurant and started cooking there. And next thing you know, she became, just a master. She is a master. She's featured on she has her own stamp. She has about 6 cookbooks out, has been an influence upon anyone who's ever done anything with Southern cooking. She's an incredible matriarch. She didn't have any children. She had those cookbooks and a lot of knowledge and education that she shared. Her creativity was phenomenal, because many times, sometimes you can't even imagine, but she is probably the pioneer for dishes like fish and grits. Sorry, shrimp and grits. I'm a vegan, so I have a tough time saying shrimp. Sorry. So shrimp and grits and other dishes like that. But she was phenomenal in her cooking, and recognized worldwide for being one of the best Southern cooks and really giving Southern cooking respectability in the larger world. So Sister Edmond Lewis, we thank you for your contribution. If you get a chance, get her cookbook, Taste of Southern Cooking, and several other cookbooks that she's produced, and follow those recipes this summer. We'll be doing a Taste of Africa event again this Juneteenth weekend, June 18th, at our farm, and we'll be highlighting her and several other cooks with some of the African produce that we'll be growing there. But she's a phenomenal Orange County native, just like Miss Nanny Helen Barrows. And we're going to walk through history just a little bit more. At the same time that Nanny Helen Barrows and Edmond Lewis was coming up, there were tremendous amounts of discrimination going on against African Americans. There were tremendous amounts of Black massacres, where tens, if not hundreds, of African Americans were ransacked, killed, ran up their properties. Tremendous time for African Americans. Between 1875 to about 1950, there was approximately 5,000 lynchings. These were usually public murders, where no one was persecuted for the murder, the loss of life. There was generally no trial given. If there was a trial given, they were generally found guilty very quick and then sentenced to death by a very maniacal crowd. And this affected our family, like affected many families in this area and other areas. Where if you did anything that remotely offended a white person, you generally had to leave town. And again, my family was affected of it, just like many other families in this area and throughout the country. And with 5,000 lynchings a week, over that 75-year period, that's approximately 1 lynching every week for 75 years. It's a tremendous amount of terror, uncertainty, discomfort, fear, and terrorism that was invoked upon African Americans throughout the country. It wasn't just limited to the South. It wasn't just limited to Virginia. It was all over the country. And these are some of the larger documented ones. There were many smaller ones that did not get documented, did not get reported. And many times families didn't and don't talk about it. We have several within our family, and I'm just now hearing about it, in my 40s, where individuals never share this information because of the fear, the terrorism, the pain that these circumstances caused. But despite that, again, we moved through and, acquired land. This gentleman here is my great-grandfather, and he acquired his property right down the road from my other property, about another 25 acres in Orange County, Virginia, in 1915. So we actually have 2 century properties. However, they're both under the umbrella of the family estate. So my great-grandfather purchased his property in April 10th, 1915, for approximately $225. As we stated earlier, in 1925, we moved through, Virginia had approximately 183,722 farmer operators. And of that, 50,000 were considered to be Black or at least non-white farmers, the highest number in the state and probably the country at the time. From then, we had a tremendous decline in the number of Black farmers in the state, in the region, as well as the country. And we mentioned, you know, the Great Migration. A lot of African Americans fled from their homes to the north because of the terror that was invoked upon them via lynching, via threats. And you can see it here. My family generally fled to Washington, D.C. A few of them fled to Philadelphia. A few of them fled to New York. One or two fled to California as well. And I say fled because a lot of times you left in the middle of the night, you know, and with no plans of returning, and you left, you know, without preparation. You just left because your life was being threatened and at risk. And then we go into the New Deal, and many of us know the New Deal, and that was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's plan to get the country moving through the Great Depression, to provide a social structure and framework for its Americans getting through the Depression and trying to get a certain amount of economic vitality and restoring the economy. But what it turned out to be for African Americans was the same deal that we've gotten previously. And during this time period, we had numerous acts that were put in place to help certain Americans, not all Americans. So we had the Federal Home Loan Bank Act of 1932, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, the Federal Home Loan Bank Act of 1932, Bangham-Jones Farm Tenant Act, Agriculture Adjustment Act of 1938, Social Security Act, as well as the GI Bill. For most of these acts, most of these bills, when they were enacted, they were not, you know, African Americans were generally not allowed to take part of those acts. In addition, you also had the Unemployment Act, and many of these bills targeted not people, but occupations. And it just so happened that the occupations they targeted were the occupations that most African Americans held. So even to this day, the Social Security Act does not allow farm workers and domestic workers to receive Social Security. And this led to the Great Migration just as much as the terrorism. So, you know, if you worked on a farm as a sharecropper, or even your own farm at a certain point, if you didn't have it registered as a legal entity, you could not get Social Security. So that means as you got older, you just had to continue to work to support yourself, you know, ideally saving money and kind of living off the savings, but you didn't have the safety net of a Social Security plan. Within unemployment, you could not receive unemployment if you were a domestic worker, a farmer, a barbershop, a barber, etc. These acts, the Home Loan Acts, African Americans were at that time denied access to federal, state, or local banking systems. The banks were very much still segregated, so you could not acquire a loan or even go to the bank to ask for a loan. And that was problematic because the home ownership became the crux for wealth in this country. And in this creation of wealth, African Americans were left out of it. Yet we still managed to kind of pool our own resources together within our community to manage the best way we could, and make sure that we still created a life that was better for the next generation. And we'll get into the GI Bill in a second. But the GI Bill was also kind of, you know, disappointing for a lot of African Americans. In 1942, D-Day, my family was having challenges with the land. At the time, my grandmother was living with my great-grandfather, which was right about 5 minutes, 3 miles from our property now. The family had made a particular proposition, which I'm not sure exactly the details of it, but they ended up having to go to court. This 1929, they made a deal, or lack of a better term, took out a loan against the land to pay for something. And then 1929, the Great Depression happens, and they're not able to pay back the loan. So the debtor takes them to court and wants to take the land in exchange, you know, as collateral for the debt that was given. But during the Depression, various individuals came to my grandmother's aid who wasn't living at the property at the time, but they knew my grandmother and knew the family. So they let my grandmother know that the land was going to be up for sale and gave her first right of refusal to acquire the land. And she managed to figure out how to do this. And again, because of depression, we were given some leeway in terms of not having a lot of pressure put on us in terms of a timeline. But the 1942 happens, D-Day happens, and our three older sons, my grandfather, gentleman to your left, my Uncle Roy, and then my Uncle Alfonso were sent to World War II. My grandfather, my Uncle Alfonso, ended up going to Germany. My Uncle Roy stayed here in the U.S. on the front lines. And they made a commitment before they left to my grandmother, my great-grandmother. We call her Grand, so if you hear me say Grand, that's what I'm referring to send back their pay. So they sent back their $29 a pay a month, every month while they were in the service to help my grandmother raise the funds to pay off the debt that was acquired back in 1929, 1930 of $1,250. So they made that commitment and that sacrifice, as well as their sisters, my Aunt Virginia, my Aunt Margie, my Aunt Faye, as well as some of my other younger sisters, my Aunt Betty, my Aunt Mamie, to work as domestics in various people's homes, my Aunt Anna, and in working that capacity, they were able to raise the $1,250 that was needed to secure this land back into the family. And my great grandfather returned back from the war, as well as his brothers. The GI Bill that was offered, the options that was given to the GI Bill was to go to Carver School and get a general agricultural diploma. My grandmother, which is the young lady right here, went to Carver, as well as my Aunt Annie and this gentleman here. And we went to Carver. Carver was the segregated school in Culpeper, as probably many of you all know. It was a school that made up Black students from grades roughly, 8th and 9th grade, on up to 12th grade. Culpeper, Madison, Orange, Rappahannock. A great majority of my family went to the school. They rave about the quality of the school, the quality of the teachers, the environment that it was. But this is for most of us, or at least most Black veterans, this is the extent of service they can receive. They were not provided any type of access in terms of loans or educational opportunities, because at the time you couldn't go to predominantly white schools. You could go to historically Black colleges and universities, but at the same time with those, they did not have the infrastructure to take in this new increase in students. So they didn't have the capacity of beds to be able to, beds, rooms, dorms, to take care of these, to really bring in a lot of these students. So my grandfather and his brother didn't partake of the GI Bill, with the exception of getting agriculture training at Carver. And these are the diplomas from Carver in general farming and in dairy. And we fast forward a bit, as this is what I call the Black Farmer Extinction Level event. Where we are now, with all that we have experienced in this country, this is the state of the Black farmer in 2021. New in 2022, so after the farm system comes out for that, we'll have a new state of the Black farmer. And this, what you're seeing here, I mean, not to go into too much detail, but it's a concept that I call compound racism and compound discrimination. That when you have individuals who have been discriminated against for generations, the compounding effect of that has negative effects on the community, on the people, especially in terms of wealth creation in this country and wealth holding in this country. Just like with compound interest, like with our mortgage, if you can put your put your money into a bank account with compound interest, you'll do very well, because it's compounding over time. It's working for you. And much in a similar way, compounding racism and compounding discrimination works against you in that same compounding way, with a daily effect and increase that pushes you back. So I mentioned earlier, this is the volume of sales that was done in 2017, almost $4 billion of agricultural sales products sold in Virginia or sold in 2017. About 1.1% of those sales were actually for from African American farms. Average value of agricultural produce, you can see that's half of what the average farmer is in America. I'm not American, in Virginia. The size of the farm as well is about half the size. And we're seeing even the only thing that's a little higher is the average age. The average age of a farmer in the state of Virginia is 59. The average age of a Black farmer in Virginia is 63. And Carter Farms is definitely working to combat a lot of those issues forthrightly. The gentleman to the left is my father, and the gentleman to the right on the tractor is my son. He's going to be the sixth generation of farmers at Carter Farms. So we trained him up very early. He does have a seatbelt on if you're due asking, and he drives very safely. His feet almost reach the pedals. I think right now they do reach the pedals. And these are my guys here, working to maintain the legacy that my great-great-grandparents have fostered, continuing to keep their hands in the soil, their souls in the soil as well. That's my father there, my Uncle Bruce driving the tractor, my Uncle Roland driving the other tractor as we prepared to plant something a couple years ago. You can recognize probably that orange red clay, Orange County red clay. But it's one of those labors of love that the Carter family has maintained for the last officially probably over 100 years. And I'm sure it's been a lot longer than that. We just don't have as much documentation going back further than that. And I like to leave individuals, as we talk about these things, a certain amount of marching orders and instructions about how to proceed. And one of the things that you have to do is admit you have a problem. You gotta have an understanding that America, Virginia, the Piedmont, Louisiana, Orange, Culpeper, your household has a problem. Racism is the longest running pandemic and problem in the Western world. Before there was COVID, there was racism. And I try to explain this in the best way possible because I think it's relatable, is that racism is like COVID for a lot of African Americans, where you don't know who has it. It can spread in you and affect your job. It can take your life. It can put you in a very unattainable situation of uncertainty. And many times the African American wears a mask to prevent or try to prevent themselves from being affected or infected by the racism. That mask usually comes in the form of appearance, of how they speak, how they talk, what individuals call code switching, where we present ourselves in a different way to ensure or try to prevent racism from infecting us, from trying to prevent people from treating us with a racist attitude or a racist thought. And we wear that mask quite frequently. And as we all know, most of us are very uncomfortable wearing masks. The African American has adopted this way of wearing a mask pretty much daily in their lives, to the point that it's taught to us by our parents and our grandparents that we have to do this in order to survive and maintain. So being aware of this is a great step forward in the right direction. The next reality is support Black farmers, support local farmers, support small farmers in Virginia. We all need your support. Farmers don't need as many advocates. We need a lot more customers. We need people buying our fresh produce, consuming our fresh produce on a regular basis. We need to really move away from the idea of convenience in all of our foodstuffs. And I'm guilty of it very much so. You buy your lettuce and it's already pre-washed, pre-packaged up. Many of us don't buy the head of lettuce and cut it as much anymore. You buy the bag of chopped greens as opposed to the bunch of greens. And it's those little things we have to return back to. I encourage everyone to support Black-owned businesses and financial institutions. Personalized Black-owned racial understanding and implicit bias and uncomfortable conversations with companies like mine, Africulture. Africulture does a whole host of trainings with various institutions from the federal, state, and local level to help one bridge or start the conversation and do it in a way that's non-emotional, that's fact-based and fact-driven. Because many times people tend to feel guilty about various situations, and especially in terms of racism and those topics. And it's, guilt is okay to feel, But at the same time, what do we do to reverse it? And the first thing, again, you have to do is identify the type of problems and kind of see what those problems are. And sometimes it takes a skilled eye like myself and others who can guide you through the process of identifying where you can do better at, where we can improve on in terms of making it fair for everyone. The next step I call my postpartum degree or post PhD, and that's willing your wealth back to Indigenous and Black individuals or organizations. As I say, you can't take it all with you. So many of us, the greatest transfer of wealth in this country is usually through wills. So it's critical that, sometimes you share the wealth. You hear of an organization or church that resonates with you and your soul, add them to your will. Give them a little something. It makes a tremendous difference. I've had a friend who had this happen to them recently, as in yesterday, and they are extremely excited about, this six-figure lump of cash that they definitely weren't expecting. Don't know who these people were that gave it to them, but it's probably going to change not just their life, but the future of their business and future generations. Next, invest in our own education about race and racial dynamics through reading, through YouTube, through music, through direct conversations with those in your community. Right now, there's still quite a bit of divisive understanding when you talk about what's termed CRT, critical race theory. Those are politicized terms. What we're talking about more so is this history, conversations about cultures, about experiences, about perspectives. That helps you, again, the last one is try to place your understanding in the shoes of others' experiences. When you can see things from other people's perspective, you'll find that you'll be able to learn more and grow. And, as an agriculturalist and as a farmer, I'm usually planting seeds, and I enjoy watching people grow. And I'm quite confident that, we can grow, you can grow if you abide by these and other instructions that we'll give over the course of the next couple of years. If you're interested in supporting Africulture or Carter Farms, by all means, this is our PayPal and Cash App. You can screenshot it. You can take a picture of it. You can email me about it later. We take all donations. We prefer we take the kind that jingles, but we prefer the kind that folds. The great words of Reverend Jenkins in Coming to America. And this is our contact information. We do a lot of workshops. We have a couple workshops tomorrow, or one workshop tomorrow, a couple next week, training individuals on how to become farmers, how to improve and increase the profit to their farms. We're having several events in the spring and summer as well. You'll find us on Facebook at Carter Family Farms, Instagram at Carter Farms VA, and then my emails are there as well. Those are usually the best way. Email is usually the best way to reach me if you ever desire to, because I can usually check that when I feel like it. Versus a phone call, I may or may not be able to stop and pick the call up. But I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank Culpeper Museum of History or Museum of Culpeper History for the opportunity to present and reaching out to me and allow me to present a little bit about what we do at Carter Farms and with Africulture.